All right, when you have your character to the point that you feel you're ready to mirror this over and you want to get started on UVs, unwrapping the character so you can start creating texture. There are a few things that you want to do to set this up and make your job a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and hide the shirt and hair. Any sort of extra layers we have, go ahead and hide those. Now we're going to make sure the center line is snapped. Notice that we're off a little bit in a few areas. So let's just take that edge and snap it flat. Let's turn off soft selection. Notice that we have the inner edges of the mouth selected. And so we're going to deselect those and then snap this flat. So move tool, translate, and then holding X and snap that flat. Just make sure that retain component spacing is turned off in your tool settings if that's not working for you. All right. So now we have that flat. We have a pretty big history stack, so we'll go ahead and get rid of that. Let's see, modify, or sorry, edit, delete by type history. In our poly shelf, actually, we have these pretty conveniently located, so let's delete history. Also, looks like we're slightly off in translate Y, but as long as our pivot and our center line are snapped to 0, and X will mirror over, no problem. That said, we might as well just freeze transformations on this to get that nice and clean. You should have this renamed, call it mesh. I think that got, because I duplicated that off, it got renamed a new poly surface. Probably when I merged up some extra pieces like fingers. All right, so before we mirror this over, I think it would be a good idea to create a mouth and eye cavity just so we don't have any holes in our mesh, and that when we mirror it over, it's like an airtight mesh. So let's go to edge, and we'll start with this eye since it's a little easier. I'll grab that inside edge and extrude it, and I'm just going to switch out to world space here and pull that straight back. I'll have to frame that up and scale that up a little bit. Maybe we'll scale it a little flatter as well. And then I'll hit G to repeat last command. Extrude it again. This time I'm going to scale it down. And then we'll fill that hole. This is also going to make some of the UV tools behave a little bit better. We could take the time to clean this up and subdivide it, but I'm not going to do that right now. All right, so let's do the same thing with the mouth. The mouth is a little bit different because we have one edge on the center line, so it's one side's open. But a similar idea. Let's just grab this edge loop. Sorry, let's go from this edge and then shift, double click that end of that edge loop. Since it's a border edge, it's going to select the whole thing if you just double click one. All right, let's do the same thing. Let's extrude it. And we'll slide it back. A quick way to get out of normal space into world space is just use your translation, scale, keyboard shortcuts, that stuff, because that will just pull you out of the tool immediately, and then you'll be translating or scaling in world space. So I'll hit G again to repeat last command. And we're just making a cavity that's going to hold eventually, tongue and teeth if we're going to create those for our character. I'm just reshaping this a little bit. Just giving it a slight fall off with soft selection. And then just bring that up, making that cavity a little bit bigger. All right, so the difference between this and the eye is we can't just select that border edge and fill hole, because it'll fill the entire inside of the mesh. So we'll start by bridging up a couple of these, select the opposite edges on the center line, and we'll go down to poly bridge, also edit mesh bridge, and then we have a nice clearly defined hole in our mesh that we can fill hole. Same thing here. I would I'll probably take the time to cut these edges across and subdivide, but you get the idea. All right, so now that we have the mesh kind of sealed up there, just make sure that we're still zeroed out on our center line. Looks good. We're going to go ahead and mirror this. Since we have created some new history there, doing the little fill in the eye and mouth, we'll go ahead and remove that history, and then we'll mirror him over. So that is under, I believe, mesh mirror. I just shift right click to get to your marking menu and mirror. Let's see that mesh and mirror. Yep. Go to the option box here, and what you're going to want to do is make sure mirror axis. Let me reset these. Mirror axis position is world. Mirror axis is X because we're mirroring along the X axis from this side to this side. Mirror direction, negative. That's by default. We're moving from the positive direction to the negative direction, so that works. If you were modeling the opposite side of this to start, you'd switch this to positive. Combine with original, yes, we're going to merge border vertices, and all these default settings should be fine. Nice thing about this is if we UV'd this, which I'll show in the next video, on one half of this, it will give us the option to flip those UVs. So if you UV'd half of it, mirrored it over, you can have a full set of UVs. All right, so we'll hit apply. And then the first thing you want to do after you mirror this is to go in and just make sure that in little tight areas like the bridge of the nose, the lips, sometimes in the crotch, that we don't have any random kind of merging where some verts that we didn't want to merge up have merged, or conversely, they're having gaps in the mesh, so kind of open spots. But it looks like this worked pretty well, and I would soften normals on this first. So shift right click, soften edge, just to remove some of that middle line creasing. But even with that, I probably get in here and start playing with the lay of some of these components. So maybe grab this center line and push it in a little bit just to soften that. It has a tendency, just as you model, to crease up a little bit. Here, kind of the same thing. Maybe pull this bridge of the nose out a little bit again to fight that creasing. Notice that now I'm working on one side of this and it's not mirroring over because we're no longer working with the proxy. So the way around that is to go into our tool settings for move, and we're going to turn on symmetry. So under symmetry settings, we're going to turn symmetry onto object, or no, world X will work for this. If your character isn't perfectly symmetrical, like let's say you start editing this and move it out of symmetry, but you still want to make symmetrical edits, you can actually do that. And the way you do that is by going to symmetry topology. And what this is going to do is it's going to ask you, it's going to say, hey, select a mesh edge for symmetry, and you're going to find a center edge and click that. And now it's going to look at the topology and try to make a best guess as to how those things are symmetrical, and does a pretty good job too. So if your character is already kind of pushed out of symmetry, you want to make him asymmetrical for some reason, then using this topology symmetry option is a good way to make edits to both sides of the body at the same time. All right, so in the next video, we're going to get this guy unwrapped and move into texture.